these are the question and answers for John and Amanda right here. And one of the questions, I just caught you on the way through. One of the dudes had asked top 3 homestead machines to buy, such as tractors and bobcats. What's your perception on that? Having been here and seen everything we did, is there anything you would do differently first? What did you think we wasted time and money on? What's your thoughts on that?
As far as wasted time goes, I would say it's getting the small equipment. Just get the real stuff as far as like skid steers, mini X's, things like that.
That's exactly what I just said.
I mean, with the skid steer, there's so many attachments. You can do pretty much anything you're going to do with any other piece of equipment.
What's the drawback to the skid steer?
You're going to tear your ground up if you don't know how to run it. And I mean, it could be a space issue. You might have a small piece of property. So, I mean, if you don't have any sort of acreage, then maybe that isn't for you.
Also, the cost of the attachments.
Yeah.
Everything for a skid steer costs more.
I mean, if you're looking at a $70,000-$80,000 skid steer plus, $3,000 to $5,000 for each average attachment, anything hydraulic powered, that's going to add up very fast.
Now, with that $70,000, that's a 49 horsepower, no, 75 horsepower. They have to run DEF on any of the bigger machines.
Up to 90, right?
Yeah. No, anything over 75. That's why ours is actually 74 and a half horsepower, that SVL 75 that we have. I wanted to buy a 95, and the dude, the sales guy said, John, I've been out to your place. All of your trails are already cut with the 75 size Bobcat. If you go up to the 95 on that straight where you run that motocross track through there with that tree, you're going to have to take trees out to get that bigger machine down there. You're going to have to remove more trees. And I know you didn't want to cut. I know you kind of weaved around trees and stuff. We kept as much wood standing as we could. So that was a big thing there. The tracks are a foot wider and the machine's like 2 feet longer. So when you turn, it makes a big difference. I remember you guys, when you would take care of the animals, you would always run those 4-wheelers like side saddle. You never even got on them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that looks so fucking stupid. Why don't you lazy motherfuckers just get on
so much easier.
Right. It's coming up to the gate. Like I would do it all the time now, 10 times a day. I'm side saddle. I give it some gas before the thing even stops running. I let off the gas, jump off the bike, grab the brake, open the fence.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I totally get it. The first time I did it, when a dog ran out while I'm getting off the bike, opening it, getting back on, it's just timing. Yeah.
We do that after a leg day too.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. What would you bring on? These guys ask homestead questions, but we really don't have the information to give them like real answers.
Right.
Do you remember when we first came on the property here, when we first bought the property? Do you remember the first time you saw the property?
Yeah. With the duck blinds on it and
Describe
everything. It was completely overgrown. I mean, everything now that's parking lot was literally young, unmature forest.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You couldn't hardly walk through it. There was some trails where like deer had come through, and you could walk around the property, but you couldn't walk through all of it by any means.
Mm-hmm.
I know we had, I believe Taylor brought in a tractor with a bush hog.
Yep, that's the New Holland I was talking about.
To initially start cutting everything down.
That was the first time I'd ever been around a real tractor.
And we wrecked those blades.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He drove that like 45 minutes on the road to get that here.
Yeah.
And that thing only moves like 10 miles an hour, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, it was completely undeveloped. Everything was rock and chert. There was softball size rocks and larger. So there was nothing here. There was no topsoil, no dirt. Everything was pine trees and briars.
I always, when I drive past into town, I look into that rock quarry on the left there where we've taken the razors a few times. And I always wonder, like, we could buy that probably super cheap. What could we turn that into, and how long would it take to turn it into something? Like, I always am attracted to those low cost, completely wrecked properties because it's such, like, anybody could do it, right? Anybody can relate to that. I can't afford a piece of property. You can afford this. They'll almost pay you to take it.
Yeah.
And what could you turn it into? Like, when you're telling that story 10 years later, it's hard to believe what it used to be, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's not far off from what we had here. There's just no standing buildings on it.
Correct.
I would start by getting a dozer and maybe an excavator out there and leveling it as much as possible.
That's what I always say. Take big pieces of equipment, knock the tops, the high points into the low points, and kind of level it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then not having the structures. It's nice to have a structure because you have something to start with, a place of, a place of operations, the headquarters or whatever.
Think about how much you would change about this building.
That's exactly where I was going. Yeah, if you didn't have any buildings, you could put buildings in different places. Now, you don't know what you don't know, and what you need on day one is very different from what you need on, 10 years.
Yeah.
But building structures, water, make sure you have water, and access are the two biggest things. But where any place you have buildings, you have the potential to put gutters and collect water. And having water staged, that was one of the first things we did when we came on this property. We cut those rail ties in half and stacked them up, and then put IBC totes.
Yep.
We had like 6 of those originally, so that we had water out different places. And then we ran hoses hundreds of feet and filled them up just so we had the water there for whatever we needed it for.
Yeah.
And we still have the first one we ever put up is up there on the top of the cliff. It's still full of water. Mm-hmm. We've used it once, refilled it. The water sitting in there right now is at least 8 years old, and we didn't even strap that down. That's in the highest wind area that we have, and it's never been strapped to the ground or anything, and it's still sitting there unmoved.
Those are what, 275 gallons?
They are, yep.
That's a lot of weight.
It is, yeah, and just the rail ties are a lot of weight.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
they are.
We were destroying fucking saws and people. Like they would drop off. We got a hookup, so we were getting rail ties like 100 at a time, and we didn't have equipment to move that stuff. Like two guys would stack them up, and we'd place them up, and then we would take and cut them with chainsaws. And man, you would be destroyed after a week's worth of work, and no matter what gloves you had, they were ruined after a day or two, and you were still, even with leather gloves, you're getting blisters and you're getting splinters coming through there, that creosote, man. Yeah.
So you were talking about a skid steer, but then, skid steer might not be in people's budget. Let's say that it was, what would be like the top 3 implements that you would want with your skid steer?
Really, it would depend on where you're starting at. I mean, regardless of where you're at, definitely a bucket. 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a bucket.
I think that's a
with that
given.
machine.
I wouldn't even consider that an implement.
Now, past that, a grapple bucket's really nice to have.
That was the first thing we used when they dropped off that John Deere.
A grapple bucket, an auger. I really haven't used anything past that. There's a lot of stuff I would like to have for it. But I mean, really, so a regular bucket, a grapple bucket, and an auger.
So if somebody had like $100,000, that would be a perfect start for them.
I would say
if you had $100,000, I would tell you to get a machine that's a couple years older and get more implements and save $20,000 and keep that. Like, you don't have to spend the $100,000.
It doesn't need to be brand new. I mean, we ran rentals that were beat up for years.
Yeah.
Takeuchi.
Yeah, we sure did.
And when you break them, you give them back.
Yeah, they would come out and service them. Like, we had tracks falling off of excavators.
To the point that they taught me how to do it, and I was putting tracks back on.
Yeah, and they weren't like, stop calling us. They're just like, hey, if this ever comes off on a Sunday night, because we were running that stuff like 24 hours a day.
We had one stuck in the pond hole with a rain coming. So it was either get it fixed or that machine was going to drown.
And that's before my guys dropped them in the pond. That wasn't even that time.
No, that was me.
Yeah. And then we had one in the back here that fell in a sinkhole. Remember that one, Eli?
Oh,
that big Takeuchi,
Yeah.
and it was completely sideways, and that pond was starting to seep into it. Yeah.
Did you guys like stepped that, right, so you can get down there to dig it out? Or because I don't know if this was
which pond?
Whatever pond you dug on camera. I don't know which one.
Okay,
it was.
so that was the big one out here.
Okay.
That was stepped. Yeah, we had to keep stepping and stepping and stepping to get down. But the pond in the middle originally was just a divot that kind of held some water that had frogs. And I'm like, hey, Cody, go up there and make that pond just a little bit bigger so that there's always water there. And I came out hours later and I'm like, hey, motherfucker, I didn't say dig a lake. I said just make this water hole. I just wanted him to cut the trench so we could put water in there, and he fucking built a pond there.
Yeah.
And it kind of went from there.
You could drive in and out of it.
Yeah, that's what. So I didn't remember if it was you or not because it was years and years ago. But I remember seeing a video where there was an excavator like in there, and but it was on like those steps going down.
Oh yeah,
And you were
yeah.
kinda,
We
like,
actually
going
brought
up
an
and down.
excavator. We originally did it, and filled it up with water because we wanted to be able to jump off the excavator and dive in there.
Yeah.
And we did. We all went swimming in there a couple times and got covered in mud, and we were swinging people around with the excavator. And after that, it was a deep hole that didn't have any water movement to it. So it just sat there full of sludge, and it was full of frogs and turtles. But like surface area wasn't big enough to support any real fish life because there was no oxygen in there.
Yeah.
It would algae bloom, and then the algae would die, and it killed everything in the pond. Yeah, we learned a lot about doing holes of water, ponds and stuff like that.
Dig a hole in the ground. Don't build a dam.
Well, the dam's not the problem. Like building the dam, the problem with the dam that was built is we built it around trees. And anytime you put dirt around a tree, even like 12 inches, 18 inches of dirt around a tree, the tree starts to rot, the tree dies. And when you build a dam around it, the tree dies and then rots. And now you have this, where that root system was, it just completely leaks.
Yeah.
Even before that, though, it still did seep because we didn't do it right.
Correct.
No.
It did eventually stop, though. It would algae bloom every year and then stop. And then that algae would kind of follow that water path and plug that up. It did stop leaking eventually.
Well, and I know we had a lot of animals in there, too.
Yeah, we would, the dogs would chase goats, or the goats would go running, and the goats would do like a deer. You'll see a goat like tuck its feet and legs up and just land in the pond, and now all of a sudden can't get out of the pond. And that's what Jack said too. He's like, always have one of your sides that has a walkout entrance. I'm like, why? He's like, because animals will get in there, and if they get in, they can't get out. He's like, you have to make it so the animals can get out. That's just farmer stuff, man. We didn't know that. We just dug holes in the ground, and like Jack's like, you better taper that down because you're going to end up with animals drowning there.
I think farm stuff is like the most problematic when it comes to that, where people are like, "That's easy. Just put seeds in the ground. Just dig a hole." And then you realize it takes a lot of knowledge and skill to actually do this.
It really does. Like,
Yeah.
because the first thing you want to do when you come in is we want to mow everything down so we can see what's there.
Mm-hmm.
But when you mow everything down in that field of grass, you realize there's not very much grass. There's a lot of bare dirt in there.
Mm-hmm.
And when you mow that down, like what if you took a temperature at the ground before you mowed it down and then cut it, you're going to have a 30-degree temperature difference. And now any moisture that was there is now gone. And now you have barren dirt that you might as well salt that shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to put something down to hold moisture to get some seeds to sprout, to grow something that we don't want, so we have shade to be able to grow things that we do want. And that's very real.
Yeah.
It's very real. Well, man, you're out of time here. I know you said you had to get out of here. I just wanted to sit down and get your perspective on this. You said almost word for word what I said. I was just curious what you were going to say.
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time beating ourselves up and destroying small equipment to try and start doing this. And the moment we got the real equipment in here, everything changed.
Yeah, but with that said, when we bought the building, like we didn't have the money to buy the building when we bought it. We didn't have money for equipment. Like when I spent that 10 grand on that tractor, that was a big purchase when we bought that.
Right.
And then as soon as we bush hog, because it would run a bush hog, a real bush hog. But as soon as we were done bush hogging, we never bush hogged here again.
Yeah.
Now we do use that thing, like a 4-wheel drive tractor. We won't ever get rid of that. I could probably sell it right now for 20. But you go across the street to the range, you bush hog that whole range down.
Yeah.
We can bush hog next door when we need to park thing next door. Like it's worth having.
We've hogged that down multiple times over there on the side. Now, I will say this, unless you've got a significant piece of property and you know you're going to use that piece of equipment regularly, maybe don't buy it. Maybe just rent it when you need it, have it planned out, use it for a weekend or a week at a time, and then get your use out of it that way.
Yeah, and then moving that equipment too, you have to have proper trailer.
Yeah.
We moved equipment that wasn't even tied down. Like you have to have binders, and there's a little bit of art to that. Like you can learn all these things, but you don't know what you don't know. You go buy a tractor and they deliver it, but if you need to move it someplace, you got to have a trailer, and then you have to have also the truck that will pull that trailer.
That's what I was
We have gooseneck trailers, and then we have bumper pull trailers, and we have trucks that we should not be pulling big trailers with, and then we have giant ass trucks with the proper trailers that we just don't want to drive them unless we have to pull that rig, you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's give and take on everything, and everything amplifies something else. You don't know what you don't know until the day comes. And having friends, man, community is the real thing. Having people that you can ask, and having people that when they see that you haven't, like, even better than having people that'll help you when you ask is having people that see that you need help and show up when you don't ask. All right, we'll talk to you guys later.